What will happen to Jameis Winston in 2022? A, he will be an MVP contender. B, he will be a Pro Bowl quarterback. C, he will be a mid-tier starter. And D, he will be an interception machine. I'm actually going to say I wouldn't be shocked if he made the Pro Bowl because so many quarterbacks are like, no, I'm good. I've done it. I've been to Hawaii. So they get down to like the 8th quarterback in the conference by the time they're done with the replacement players.
This is not the Mike Barilla 17th alternate Pro Bowl quarterback here. Like somebody who had a lot of votes and would have been, if not one of the 3 NFC guys, the first guy off the bench. That's what we're talking about.
Then C, mid-tier starter.
That's kind of where I'm falling as well. Winston's numbers in a small sample size were very good last year. Had he qualified for the leaderboards, it would have been 10th in DVOA. But there's some really interesting statistical artifacts in there, which happens when you don't throw 200 passes. For example, 45% of his dropbacks in the red zone were touchdowns. That is not sustainable. That is not going to happen again. Outside the red zone, he had a DVOA of negative 5.8%. That's who he was. He had the lowest accuracy percentage of his career, according to SIS charting, despite throwing the shortest passes of his career. There's a lot good there. There's a lot of potential there. But Jameis is Jameis. He's going to put all these great highlight reel throws, and he's going to have passes which are 20 yards away from any given receiver.
I wrote today about Jameis as a fantasy pick, and that I think he's underrated in fantasy, in part because I think he can be an average starter, and in part because he's an average starter who has much better receivers than he did last year. And that's the thing. For all that was last year's numbers, now you add Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Jarvis Landry to the equation instead of Marcus Callaway, Deontay Harris, and Traquan Smith.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was actually going to veer towards D. Like I am the Jameis skeptic. I think that we've put together this theoretical Jameis out of all his hot streaks and said, well, if you throw away all the bad things, he's really good. But now that I've seen proof of life of Michael Thomas, that he's not just like hiding in the weeds somewhere. And yeah, Alvin Kamara looks like he's going to be playing for a while. His court date's pushed back indefinitely. So you've got that talent group there. I think he comes in at C. I can't bring myself to push him up and say, oh, he's going to be this or that at B. Brian mentioned the statistical artifacts. Last year, he threw 58 passes when the Saints were leading. He only threw 54 passes when the Saints were trailing. 8 touchdowns and 0 interceptions when already leading. Sometimes that was against the Bucs, but a lot of times that was against weaker competition. One of the big things when you have a small sample size is look how often this guy was just sitting on a lead, had the opportunity there to not take as many risks, etc. And that can make a quarterback look better than they necessarily are.
I'm really excited that Michael Thomas has been back. And when we were writing the Almanac and everything, he was on PUP as he was beginning to training camp going. But the fact that he's going and apparently at full speed to the point where he is practicing today in joint practice against the Packers, these are all very good signs. I doubt we'll ever see 2019 Michael Thomas again, just after missing basically year and a half full of injury and just general variance and stuff like that. I don't think we'll ever see quite can't guard Mike as he was there again. But even if he's just a top 15 receiver, that's a huge boost to the Saints offense. I'm very happy that he's practicing again because the league's better when he's going.
And that's why I think the projection, so our offensive projection for them is actually slightly below average. And I think that's very achievable. It's not that anybody thinks Winston is very good. It's that I think that for a lot of us, that one Tampa Bay year with the 30 interceptions stands out like a sore thumb. For the most part, he's a very average, slightly above average quarterback for most of his career. And with these receivers, he can be slightly above average. And if the defense is as good as we're projecting that it should be rank-wise, if it's as good as we're projecting, that's going to be enough. He
was slightly above average with like Mike Thomas and Chris Godwin and some of the other guys they had there too. So he always had good receivers when he had those years. I still don't see this Jameis because the Jameis you talked about in previous years was losing his job to Ryan Fitzpatrick like twice a season. I'm still worried about that. But you're right. If we're coming in at 18th on offense, 17th, that I can see built out of his big playability, Michael Thomas's ability, a strong offensive line. It looks like we've had mixed reviews on Trevor Penning, but he's not going to be, I don't think, a disaster at left tackle at this point. So I can see that slightly below average Saints offense. It's that number one defense I keep tripping over.
They have been a top 3 defense for the last couple years. And they have been a top 3 defense without being at the top of the league in takeaways. They're only 8th or 9th in takeaways each year, but they're like 2nd or 3rd in DVOA. So that's much more sustainable. I know we don't think of the talent in New Orleans and go, oh my God, like even Cameron Jordan. Like nobody responds to Cameron Jordan the way they do to TJ Watt or something. Like nobody's like, oh my God, Cameron Jordan. But the fact is that this defense comes together really well, and it added Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May to play safety. I mean, they lost Marcus Williams, but they added Marcus May. I think that that's a wash. Like the pieces work really well together. I think the dangers are, one, the fact that defense is just less predictive than offense, and therefore being first in defensive projection is about half as strong as Tampa Bay being number 1 in offensive projection. Right. Like we just don't, it's a range of possibilities. They're probably not going to actually be number 1, even if it's the number 1 projection. And the other thing is Dennis Allen, when he was the head coach of the Raiders, and all of a sudden he had to do all that head coaching stuff and not just run the defense. His defense has sucked. And if that happens again, they're in trouble.
I wonder if our projections are underselling going from Sean Payton to Dennis Allen as head coach, both in the drop-off on potential offensive play calling and distracting Allen from the defensive total. That is a big loss at the head coaching position, and an unexpected one as well.
And a fairly unmeasurable one from a numerical standpoint. It's not something I can put in the system. Right?
Exactly. And there's very few historical precedents for, a great offensive coach leaving his successor with, okay quarterback and stuff like that. The only one, for the Almanac, I dug back trying to find a similar situation. All I could find was Joe Gibbs leaving Washington for the first time after 1992. And Washington collapsed the next season, and nothing went right there. They were aging. Gibbs was holding that team together basically through force of willpower, and as soon as he left, everything imploded. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen in New Orleans, but there's a higher chance than I would expect of an average team just to collapse when you have that huge change up at the top.
I like that scenario because Mark Rippon kind of is the Jameis Winston, who it's like, oh yeah, there's success in his past, etc. And also that Washington team was a very veteran team. And this is a very veteran team. And one thing I am concerned about is the average age of this defense of the key players is like the Mario Davis's age. That's
and
another.
Tyrann Mathieu is older.
Right. He's replacing Malcolm Jenkins, too. He left. So it's almost a swap out. You can't say, well, they got the Honey Badger.
There is some youth here, though. May is still in his prime. Yes. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is still in his prime. Paulson Adebo is only in his second year.
More still young.
But yeah, Cameron Jordan is older, and DeMario Davis is older, and Mathieu is older.
And that's why I can't, you tell me, this is going to be a top 10 unit, I get there. It's that first place that I trip over. Plus, last year, they had really strong defensive numbers, and I keep tripping over the Eagles game where the Eagles ran up the middle against them. It looked like they were buckling. It was the Trevor Siemian era at quarterback. I get that was part of the problem. But I wonder how much Panthers and how much Falcons is in the data in a way that even DVOA can't necessarily.
But there's also a lot of Buccaneers in the data.
Yes. And that's, but they also
shut down the Buccaneers. And yes, useful title prints this out. Marcus May is coming off an Achilles injury, yes. And I guess you don't quite know what to expect of guys coming off Achilles injuries, but he's not coming off like a week 16 Achilles injury, like a week 1 Achilles injury or something. So
there's been no reports out of camp of any problems with him so far.
There have been notes out of camp of Jameis Winston having a setback, and he is still on a brace. But he has some sort of setback with his foot. So that bears monitoring. It's not, DEFCON 1 yet by any stretch of the imagination. But he's coming off an ACL tear and throwing with a brace. And sometimes you will get, those cascading injuries where you overcompensate for your knee and you wind up hurting your foot.
ESPN asked me to write, which team I think was most likely to go over their number in Vegas. And I picked the Saints. Originally, I had the Eagles. And then we updated it, and the Eagles' number in Vegas has gone up. So now I switched it to the Saints. This is the team I think is most likely to go over their number in Vegas.
The Saints as an alternate spread. Now, again, these alternate spreads are available at DraftKings. But if you look at your favorite app, you may find them as well. Saints over 9.5 wins. So this is an alternate number. Over 9.5 wins at plus 175.
Our projection system loves that. Their actual Vegas number is 8.
Okay,
over under 8 is their actual number.
Yeah, going. I would go over 9.5 on even money. I question their ceiling. I question how high they can go, but I think this is going to be a wild card team. They're going to get 10 wins. I am considering the competition in their division. I really think that this is going to be a very solid team for this year. I have questions about where they're going after this, but that doesn't matter.
They're a mess in the future.
And Saints fans love that. Oh, the future. Oh, we'll just pull another rabbit out of the hat. Ain't no more rabbits. This is it. Even as the skeptic of the Saints here, 8 wins, forget about it. 5-1 in that division, if you assume that they're going to be Buccaneers killers, as they often have been. 5-1 is almost like automatic. Then you just need 3 out of division wins. Come on, that's a cakewalk. I like this alternate spread too, because I like the plus 175. And like you said, Brian, it looks like it's going to be around 10 wins, around 11 wins. That's just, if you're a pretty competent team in the NFC, that's where you're going to land.
Our projections always have this range of possibilities where all kinds of wacky things happen, but without a lot of injuries, I do not expect them to actually be competing with Tampa Bay for the top of the division. But I do think they're going to be a wild card team.
The NFC South is interesting because there are 2 good teams and 2 not so good teams. And there are 2 teams who kind of understand where they are and 2 teams who don't seem to understand where they are. And they those groups don't overlap that much. Today we're kind of covering the teams which don't really seem to understand where they are in the cycle of rebuilding versus competitiveness.
That's a good point. That is a very good point. Yeah, each team, right. Give the Falcons, we're not talking about today, credit. That's like, this is the long leash rebuild. We just traded our veteran quarterback for picks to get out of cap hell, and here's where it's starting. And the Buccaneers are like, Super Bowl run one more until Brady decides his 10-day vacation becomes a permanent vacation, etc. Yeah, this is a team that's like, hey, we're going to be a wild card this year. And then
we're avoiding the future to do so. Excellent.
We've mortgaged everything for this. Right. Yes. And we'll get to the Panthers, God help us, in a second.
The future for the Saints, there's no more money to be pushed into the future.
No more money to be pushed into the future. Their draft picks in the future have been spent around the world to get like guys this year and all. And they got a lot of guys in their 30s or guys facing indictment, or guys like Michael Thomas, who may be a happy camper this year, but has probably noticed Devontae Adams' contract and Tyreek Hill, and does not have a long history of staying a happy camper for long, also coming around the bend.
Yes, if he turns into Michael Thomas again, then he's going to want to be paid like he turned into Michael Thomas.
And New Orleans cannot do that.
He will turn into Michael Thomas again off the field, in addition to turning into him on the field.
But we're all positive about them for this year.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.